Good evening, everyone. We're just going to let some other people filter in before we kick off. Welcome to this evening's GAIN session, Day in the Life of an Investment Analyst. We're really pleased that you've joined us. My name's Becky and I work for GAIN, Girls Are Investors. And I just wanted to give you a bit of information about the work that we do before we kick off this evening. So our mission is to increase the female application rate for entry-level jobs into investment management roles from 20% to 50%. And we do that through really great events like the one that we're about to watch and listen to this evening, schools talks, university visits, insight programs, internships, mentoring, all sorts of things. So if you've not already, please join our newsletter, and you can do that by visiting gainuk.org, and we've got tons of resources on there as well. So there's loads of information that we can share with you and hopefully help you in your career progression. So I'm going to hand over to Maka this evening, who's going to be chairing and hosting this event, and she's going to introduce our panelists and kick things off. Please get involved. There's a Q&A box at the bottom, so if you've got any questions throughout, whack them in there and the panelists will do their best to answer them. And without further ado, Maka.
Thanks, Becky. That was great. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We're really excited to have this event today. Also, thank you, Monica, Jack, and Mia for volunteering and participating in this event. So just to kick things off, I'll do short introductions of the panelists today, and we'll get started with the questions. So to start with, Monica, who joined Asset Risk Consultants in June 2021, while completing her master's degree in applied psychology and economic behavior at the University of Bath, as well as she holds a bachelor's degree in psychology. She works in the investment consulting team. I will mispronounce this, but I'll say Guernsey, focusing on yeah, sorry for my bachelor pronunciation, but Monica focuses on international client-based deploying custody and consulting service line, and I'll let her get into the details of the role a little later on. And our next panelist is Jack. Jack joined DTZ Investors, which is a real estate investment manager, in January 2020. He graduated from the University of Bristol in 2019, and he studied economics. He works as an investment analyst across the indirect team and focuses on both listed and unlisted investments in the UK and overseas. And equally, I'm sure he will have more to say about his role very shortly. And lastly, we have Mia. Mia started her career as an investment analyst at a boutique discretionary fund management firm in September 2019, after working her way up from an administrative positions while also undertaking professional qualifications in her spare time. She's currently based in Bristol, and her main responsibilities include fund and market research through manager meetings and research. So Mia, if I can start with you, the first question I have for you was, what was it like starting out in your role and breaking into the industry without having a degree to start?
Yeah, really good question. Really tough one to answer because it is hard, but it really shouldn't be, if that makes sense. So there is no degree for being an investment analyst at the very end of it. There are several relevant degrees you can do, like economics, mathematics, it can all be relevant. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't be an investment analyst without one of these degrees. But what you will see is that lots of companies targeting new recruits to come in do so via graduate schemes, or on all of their job adverts, you'll see a minimum degree standard of education. But this shouldn't put you off if you don't have a degree, because it's just a bit of a lazy filter to prove that you're capable of learning. Whereas for me, I didn't go to university because of my background coming from foster care. It made it very difficult for me to move around a lot. And I never felt like not going to university was going to hold me back until it was holding me back from doing what I really wanted to do in investment. So it was really difficult, but I found that just constantly finding different ways to demonstrate my ability and show my passion for what I wanted to do really helped me. And then eventually you get recommendations from people. You learn so much just from talking to people that it kind of, I mean, you do get a bit of an accentuated imposter syndrome from being surrounded by people from red brick universities that have this kind of automatic status. But eventually it will kind of break down that barrier, and the people that work with you, that see your ability and know that you don't have a degree and see your identity, it will break down for them the reliance on screening people with a degree.
That's great. And just quickly, can I ask, just to go around the room and just quickly describe what a typical day looks like for you in your role?
Yeah. So a big part of my role is doing fund manager research. At this boutique DFM that I work for, we run model portfolios. So it's when kind of retail clients can buy into a portfolio that we've already created for them based on their risk level and their objectives. And so that is mostly collective investments. So we seek out active fund managers. So different to analysing direct equities, where you look at all of their ratios, the company profitability and things, we focus very much on fund manager selection, and we're analysing someone else's ability to pick good companies based on what style they think.
Okay, great. And Monica, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so I'm in investment consulting. So sort of similar to what Mia does, where she just judges the ability of individual managers to manage a fund. We might look at an investment management house, so like where Mia works, and how they run money at a particular risk level. So my day-to-day would involve things like watching a presentation. So sort of Mia's company may come in and present to us and pitch one of their model portfolios. And as an investment consultant, an analyst for an investment consultant, I will help mark those presentations and provide feedback to investment managers on how to pitch to a client at a certain knowledge level about investments. And my day would also involve writing economic commentary, so updates on what's happening in the market, writing a report, so reviewing how a client's particular portfolio has done for a certain number of managers that they might have, and maybe preparing a presentation for a pitch that we might be doing to a client.
Perfect. And Jack, do you want to go next?
Yes, so without trying to sound overly cliche, most days are pretty different. I mean, generally speaking, you sort of get in the office, first thing you do is obviously check your emails and then sort of read news. We receive quite a lot of sort of equity research as well, so probably spend first hour of your morning reading through emails and reading through sort of news and research. But so I sit on two teams. So I sit in the indirect teams, which is effectively like a fund of funds, and then I sit on a co-living team, which is a co-live fund, which is a co-living fund. So on the indirect side of things, at the moment, we're spending a lot of time reporting. So it's sort of that time in the quarter where all our holdings are releasing sort of quarterly reports, etc. So we're spending a lot of time going through quarterly reports, meeting with managers, and then we're obviously then reporting that back to our investors and modeling those sort of holdings to see whether, I guess, they're a buy, hold, or sell. Also, we've just started investing in REITs, so that's sort of taking up a lot of our time, just even trying to get to grips with sort of REITs in the REIT market. Also just sort of doing fund and market analysis. So at the moment, there's a couple of our funds that maybe aren't performing as well as we'd hoped. So we're sort of going out back into the market and sort of analysing them against their competitors and seeing if there's better options. And then on the co-live side of things, it's a lot more sort of nitty gritty, a lot more actually on site, sort of seeing what we've just launched our first co-living asset in London. So we're spending a lot of time on site, probably once or twice a week, and just getting to grips with sort of how that operates. And also got annual strategies and stuff going on at the moment. So that's taking up a lot of time.
Great. And Jack, I know you mentioned that DTZ Investors launched the world's first co-living fund. So for the group who are not familiar with what a co-living fund is, how would you describe that to the group? So
co-living as a concept is just, I guess, a form of build to rent, which I'm sure probably most people are familiar with. Basically, each resident has their own sort of self-contained studio. But these studios are relatively small in size, but they're self-contained, they have their own kitchen, etc. But the whole concept is that you effectively live in the sort of within the communal space more than you would in ordinary sort of BTR scheme. So our latest scheme, about a third of the floor space is communal space. So we've got communal lounges, communal kitchens, cinemas, gyms, you know, private dining. So although you obviously sleep in your room, you know, the whole sort of concept is you get back in the evening and you know, there's various events going on. So there's normally at least an event a day. So that might be whether it's a yoga class or like a baking class. So you sort of more of a community feel to it than sort of typical BTR. So hopefully that sort of explains it.
Yeah, that's clear. And also just as a little comment, if anyone has questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll highlight them. My next question is from Monica. I just wanted to ask, so as someone holding a psychology degree, how did you find it breaking into the industry? And as well as how did you apply any maybe soft or hard skills that you learned at university to working?
Yeah, of course. So I think coming from university to full-time work, it will always initially be a shock for a lot of people. You know, instead of maybe turning up to lectures for 4 or 5 hours a week for some people, myself included, you're suddenly working 35, 40-hour weeks with a commute maybe. And that is a shock. The second shock, I think, is the jargon. So, you know, as you've probably gathered, looking at investments as a career, every other sentence has at least 2 acronyms in it, and learning all of those straight away can be difficult. It feels like you walked into a completely different language. But quite quickly, it all starts to make sense, and you realize that a lot of the skills that you learned at university are really transferable. So from psychology, there were statistics that we use every day. When you're looking at a piece of research that's been done, studying research methods, also really useful for this job in a way that maybe you wouldn't have thought of beforehand. And then when it comes to things like soft skills, work group projects from university is team working in an office, giving presentations, writing reports, meeting deadlines, and studying independently is something that you will have to do in this job. It's a very self-motivated, you go as far as you personally try. No one's going to push you to excel through your own career. So that skill that a lot of people do learn at university can be really, really helpful starting out in investments.
So that's really interesting. So how would you give someone the advice to maybe, if you have a degree that's maybe less conventional and then you apply your new skills, would you recommend taking the initiative and doing something differently? Is that awarded in your role, and how did your team receive it when you approach things differently?
So I work for quite a small company. We're about 70 people now, I think. And I'm quite lucky that it's always been a very interdisciplinary environment. So lots of people either don't have degrees, have a variety of different STEM subjects that they've studied at university. And it meant that it was automatically an environment where the outside knowledge that I had from an unrelated, in quotes, degree was automatically valued. And that's something that you can gauge when you're applying for jobs based on your interview. When you talk to people about what you've done at university, about your previous experience, you can start to gauge whether or not the company that you're applying for really values that, because it is of value. Your work experience, the time and the things that you've learned before coming to this job or before starting a job is of value, and an employer that you want to work for will see that. One of the good ways I would recommend trying to put your best foot forward is expressing an interest, being a self-starter, saying, understanding how what you've learned isn't relevant, and then really, really pushing for how it is, finding those connections yourselves. Don't expect other people to find them for you, and show what you can bring to the table.
Yeah, that is a great point. I think a lot of people who apply to investment analyst positions have the impression that you have to have either a maths degree, economics, or finance degree. Mia, maybe you could link into this. Did you find that, you know, expressing your work experience and maybe undergoing qualifications before or after getting the role helped you progress in your career, and as well as when you applied, what kind of skills did you show, and how did you highlight your skills in the application process? That would be great.
Yeah, I would say the first rule of getting past that is to ignore the job advert when it says degree, and whether it's degree in something and you have a degree in something else, or it says a degree in anything and you don't have a degree. Ignore, put your best foot forward anyway, throw your hat in the ring, because that it means nothing basically. And I honestly think it's outdated. I've just been offered a new position somewhere else, and on that job description it was required to have a first or something. I didn't even see the job description before they offered it to me. So that's the first thing, is don't be intimidated by it either. Don't think that you're someone lesser shooting above your weight, because you're not. I don't know what that phrase was, punching above your weight. You're not. You just go and be your authentic self and really show who you are and what you're capable of. And yeah, I think the main thing is just being confident in your ability, and whether that is your ability to learn or your ability to do what you're applying to do, it still counts. For me, I knew that I wanted to be in investments before I was in investments, and so I sought out the CISI, the Chartered Institute for Securities and Investments. I started on their lowest entry level exams, which was level 3. It was just introduction, and then by the time I'd done that, there were admin roles that were coming my way, and I was just working through those. And while I was working, I was looking for the people senior to me, establishing those relationships, like personal relationships. I didn't necessarily work very closely with these people, but I knew them well enough that I could go down when I had a spare couple of minutes and go, I've seen this on something, can you explain it to me? And then after a couple of years doing that, you all of a sudden have people that weren't working with you that know what you're capable of, that can recommend you for things. So that's how I got into the job I'm in now. Is I was in an administrative position. I worked my way up the technicality of the admin space, so eventually reached kind of the most technical things you can do as an administrator. And then when I was ready to move elsewhere, I had a recommendation from one of the directors in that branch. And then from where I was now, in a really small firm, you can kind of stick your head up a bit more. There's more things for everyone to do, rather than a big firm that has departments for things, and you'd be stepping on someone's toes. If you got involved, you'd like mess things up. In a small firm, you can really kind of take ownership of more things. And if it's something that doesn't require like a level 4, generally you'd have to do dealing or things like that. Unless it's something like that, there's not really a name on it. You can improve anything, and then you can really showcase your talents that way.
Yeah, I think you touched upon a really good theme, is building your network, which I think is very underestimated and underrated. When you mentioned seeking out recommendations and going for, little coffee chats even before you started in the role, what would you recommend for people who are currently looking to apply for roles, or are applying, or in some stage of the process? What steps would you recommend them to take? And as well as when you're in the role, is asking for recommendations, is that a formal process? Is that simply a chat, or how would you go about doing that?
Sure. So if you're looking for your first position, it's a bit more difficult because everyone's only going to go by your CV to get you selected and stuff. So at this stage, what I will say is be your best self to everyone you speak to. So even if that's a recruiter and you think it doesn't matter because they're not the one interviewing me, they're the one that's recommending you. So as you are as a person, people are not selecting your brain, they're selecting you as a whole. So if you're nice to deal with to the recruiter can really give an honest account of what they think you might be like. Same with anyone in the industry, a salesperson, whoever you might come across, even if they're not the person that you want to be sat in front of as a hiring manager, those are the people that already have those connections, who's going to be able to say your name to those connections. So that's one thing. Also, learning how to write a really good cover letter. is really invaluable, and adding a cover letter when it's not requested. I know when you're applying for jobs and you see you must include a cover letter, you think, God, why? But being able to write a really, really good letter is just going to demonstrate your writing skills. And as an analyst, you need to take every opportunity to demonstrate how you can display things. That makes sense. So that I would say, and then once you're in it, you can just talk to everyone. That's what I did. I just talked to everyone and find out what everyone does and ask people questions about their roles, and then you get a sense of how everything works together. For me, the recommendation process wasn't at all formal. So you obviously have your referencing, which is normal, like your line manager, but you could ask anyone for a reference. So I've had personal recommendations from people in different teams, in higher up teams. I had a recommendation from an investment director when I was in admin. I've had a recommendation from a head of research when I was an analyst. Like, it really doesn't matter as long as you're comfortable with that person. It's a bit more of a personal thing than a work thing, because this person is recommending you based on what they know of you. So I had a particular investment director that I spoke to a lot. He helped me understand loads of things just on our own spare time, like on a Friday afternoon when it was naturally a bit more quiet for me or him. I would pop down and see if he was feeling like a chat, and we would talk about things. We would talk about the market. We would talk about a portfolio that I was thinking of doing a dry run of, how I was going to invest my own money, and he would teach me about things like that. So then when I came to be applying for other things, I could say to him, would you consider a written recommendation for me? And he absolutely jumped at the chance, which is lovely for me. So it really is about relationships when it comes down to it, because if someone can vouch for you, that means so much more than any bit of writing on a bit of paper.
Yeah, that's great. And that's a good point. I think the topic of having that soft skill and initiative to go out and speak to either more senior people, on doing your role, or even a little bit higher, to not be afraid and to go and chat to people and leave a good impression. I think that's a great point. And Jack, do you have a comment on that as well? Did you find that writing cover letters was a big advantage to your application, and as well if you found any challenges on your way to applying and how you landed your role, if you have any advice for the group?
I think, sort of from my own personal experience applying for these roles out of undergrad, especially investment management, there's probably hundreds of roles or for tens of thousands of students. So I think you probably need to be a little bit more creative than just applying for the 20 top investment managers that offer grad schemes. So I mean, how I actually ended up getting my job was, say for example, you're interested in real estate investment management, or just any form of investment management for argument's sake. You can literally go online, find the top 500 investment managers by AUM. You can see which ones offer grad schemes. If they don't offer grad schemes, drop them emails. That's how I ended up getting my job. I ended up cold emailing off the bat. Well, I've probably sent quite a few cold emails, but got probably a 50% response rate, which is pretty decent. And that's how I ended up getting my job. I emailed someone. They said their team didn't have a role going. They put me through to one of their colleagues who said, if you're interested in this, we could set up a call, had a couple of rounds of interviews, end up getting the job. So I think, don't just apply for the sort of the typical grad schemes. You probably, it's a super competitive industry, so you've got to be a little bit more creative.
That's great. And Monica, do you have maybe a comment about how you approached building your network, how you created your own brand, or how you marketed yourself to leave a good impression on the team?
Yeah, I think the first thing I'd say is that there's no one correct way to get a job, to get your first job especially. I think we've had two examples of people going about it completely differently, taking any job in the right company, or applying for jobs that don't exist when you look them up, are two excellent ways to find them. Personally, I'd scattergun applied to everything. I did maybe 60 applications in 2 months for whatever was going. As soon if it had the word analyst in the title, I'd probably applied for it. And whilst I think that was useful, the main thing that taught me was to get used to rejection, because these things are highly competitive, and I think the things that come up first are the ones everyone's applying for. So don't be afraid to look outside of your jurisdiction. So if you're dead set on wanting to work in London, maybe work for a company that has an office in London and somewhere else. Apply to the one somewhere else with the intention of, in a year, trying to transfer to London or wherever you'd like to be. So I work offshore in the Channel Islands. It's where I grew up, which is probably an advantage for me knowing about this place, but I would love to shout about it as somewhere to work and as an alternative route to finding a job in the financial services sector, in investments or any type of financial services. In terms of avenues for networking, events like this one, Gain events, are really good opportunities to meet people. Getting onto company mailing lists. So if you've seen an investment firm has a newsletter that they send out, be on that newsletter, get people's information, learn about the company. Then if you get an opportunity to meet those people, network, build a personal relationship with them, go for coffee, ask for a job, find a way in. And there's also signing up to like the CISI events, or paying out, it's some of your own money, and as university students or not at university, money is always an object. But if you can afford to sign up to the IMC, to the CISI level 3 exams, you can then go to those events and meet those people, and then be a part and network that way. And internships. So those are all different ways, I think, to find networks of people to help you get your foot in the door, which I really do think is the most difficult first step to make, trying to get a job in investments.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think I agree with the wider group that I think taking initiative really helps in networking. I think that first step in doing something you haven't done before is a scary bit, but it does pay off, because if you meet one person, you can ask them to introduce you to another person, and you can build like a little networking tree, which I think the group will agree it really helps. I have a question for Mia and Monica. Investments generally being a male-dominated industry, do you have any comments about how you found it being in a male-dominated industry, and how you overcame that challenge? Whether you have any suggestions to the group?
Yeah, so it is a very male-dominated industry, financial services as a whole, but then certain types of firm can be more or less diverse than others. Where I've worked previously has always been very male-dominated. I worked underneath a female investment director now, and at one point our team was 50-50 male and female, and that was a different experience. It really depends on the people. So you can work with a team of all men who are difficult, who see you as the tea maker, who see you as the letter writer and the phone answerer. And that can be difficult because you don't want to be too abrasive in not accepting that role, and they might not realize that they're doing it because they're old school and it's always been that way for them before. But also know how to stand up for yourself in a polite way, know your role, and probably get out of that firm, to be honest. If it's not serving you, and it can take a toll on your mental health if you're constantly being pigeonholed into something. But then there are other teams you can work with that are all men, and they really lift you and raise you and are full allies. So I wouldn't say that being in a male-dominated industry is always entirely the worst thing ever. There are good bits and there are bad bits of it. One of the good bits is that generally people wait for you to sit down first, and they let you order first at lunch. So it's not always awful. Hopefully it does get better though, because you will find that at the events you go to where there's lots of other females, which will tend to be the ones only marketed at females, those are where you make your best connections, because everybody is so much more relaxed. Like the Investment Week, Women in Investment Festival and things like that, and award ceremonies for women and stuff. If obviously it's expensive, and if your company allows it, you can go. It's not something you can do without being part of a company, because these tickets can cost a lot of money. But that is where you're gonna, like, that's where I've met some of my best work friends that I've never worked with. So yeah, I think as long as you have the right allies and you find the right people, and you're not letting the negative side of being in a male dominated industry get to you too much, it's going to be fine and it's going to get better.
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of what Mia said. I think going into a male dominated industry from a psychology degree, which was definitely predominantly female for about 5 years, I was anxious about what that transition would be like. And I think when you're in interviews, it's not just them interviewing you, you are interviewing them on what their company culture is like. You have the opportunity to ask questions at that stage and sort of gauge as much as you can what type of people you think you'll be working with. And if you go into an interview and you ask them questions about, maybe what percentage of people are women in your office, have you aligned yourself with diversity and inclusion goals on any spectrum? You can ask people these questions in interviews. It shows that you're interested, it shows that you're forward focused. And if those responses aren't up to your standards, you don't have to take that job. You can say no. I know at an entry-level position, you will want to take any job that's handed to you, but if you go into an interview and you feel really uncomfortable, you don't have to take the job. There will be another one, I think, is the first thing. And then I think finding it, being yourself, just asking questions. If you feel like you're in an environment where you are actually experiencing discrimination based on the fact that you are a woman in a male-dominated environment, find out what your options are. Talk to somebody, express that. I think as someone who studied a lot about the theory behind discrimination and prejudice and what it's going to be like, I had all these notions of walking into the worst possible scenario and having to have all these defenses ready and in place. And actually I've been really lucky, and I haven't had that to any extent for what I sort of expected going in. But you can do things and look them up beforehand, stand up for yourself. Don't assume the worst. If you assume the worst, you'll see the worst in people. Sometimes you need to choose to see the lighter side of things. Discrimination happens at like a wide, you can see that at a country level, at a company level, but at an interpersonal level, you just have individual experiences with people, and sometimes those people might just not be nice people. And viewing it like that, and not viewing yourself as like a woman who's struggling in a male-dominated environment, can sometimes help your day-to-day, I guess.
That's very good advice. Mia, you wanted to say something? Sorry.
Yeah, it's a really good point actually about the interview questions. I have been offered a new position, don't know if I mentioned it, and in my interview for that, this is an all-male team, all male, all of similar age, so I'm totally out of place going in. But in my interview, I said to them, it was more qualitative than anything. There was no answer they were going to give me that was going to be like tick or cross, but I said, how do you think it would affect the dynamic of your team having a woman join? Because that's a really telling question. And probably as well, because people aren't used to being asked questions like that, definitely the person I asked was not expecting it. Give him a second chance at answering it, because he straight away went, and I thought, try again. So I think, yeah, that and when you ask people questions that they weren't expecting, that also gives you a good insight into who they are as a person, because as an interviewer, you're prepared to ask questions and you're prepared to put this hiring manager front on, whereas if someone sits in front of you and goes, what is your favorite strategy, what's your favorite investment style, something like that they're not expecting from you, or how would a woman in your team affect your dynamic, have you looked at XYZ, just something like that that's purely qualitative, there's not a right or wrong answer, you're not marking them on it, it really brings out someone's personality, and then you can gauge a lot of what someone's going to be like to work with.
Yeah, that's lovely advice. I think I wish I heard that during my application days, because that would really help. It really makes you stand out if you not necessarily argue with them, but if you have something different to say, it'll really stand you out. I do have a couple of questions that popped up. I think this one is for Jack, by Melissa. So she says, I'm currently studying my Master's of Architecture and looking at transitioning into finance and particularly real estate. Her question is, what are key skills I can play on when applying for these sort of roles?
I think Melissa's probably in quite a good spot. Given obviously if you're interested in architecture, you fundamentally have an interest in real estate. Obviously, I guess there's many transferable skills from architecture. I mean, I know architecture is very mass heavy, so I guess that seems to be a key skill in sort of real estate. But in terms of other skills, I think real estate in particular, especially on the direct side of things, is still very much relationship driven. So a lot of the key skills are maybe more on the soft side. So yeah, I mean, around communicating and building relationships with people's, compared to, I guess, like sort of equity or bond markets, it's far less analytical, far less sort of, I guess, volatile. It's private markets typically are, but yeah, no, I think Melissa's probably already in quite a good spot, got an interest in real estate, probably good at maths. I think, yeah, just being able to show that the skills you have are transferable. I don't think there's too much I can offer other than that. I think by the looks of it, it's not really a sort of bad position to be in. Sounds like quite a good position, to be perfectly honest.
That's good. That's very encouraging. Hopefully that answers your question, Melissa. I do have one more by Gamma, who asks, I think this ties into what you were talking about earlier, Mia, about I recently got asked this during a job interview, what are your expectations of me as your potential employer? And how would you answer that question, I guess?
Yeah, there are so many ways you can answer that question. When you first get asked it, you're probably thinking, I expect you to pay me, which you probably shouldn't say because it's a given. The things that they're looking for here is, are you the kind of person who wants to be given something and work independently? Are you the kind of person who wants training with things? Do you have any training needs that you know that you're going to want from them? Do you want something really explicit to follow? So what I would say from my point of view as an investment analyst going for another investment analyst role, my expectations would be to know what sectors I'm covering, to know what is in my remit when it comes to administration around the role I'm doing, kind of things like that. So your expectations of your employer are how they're going to present your role to you. So what are you expected to cover off? How are you going to be appraised is a really good one. And generally think about how you like to work, and then think about how they might present that to you. Does that make sense?
That's great. I think that answers that question really well. We also have another one. So this, I'll just throw it out to the group. Could you please describe what kind of activities are involved for interacting with clients, both either internal and external?
I mean, from my point of view, like where I work, most of the sort of they're segregated mandates. So you'll be running a portfolio on a discretionary basis for, say, a pension fund. And in terms of client interaction, it's actually very minimal. Effectively, you're left, because it's discretion, you're effectively left to your own devices. And we actually only really, the main mandate I sit on, we only actually really interact with our investor once a year, which is when we have an annual strategy sort of investor meeting. And yeah, we talk how performance has gone over the year, etc. We obviously send them quarterly reports, but they, there's rarely any comments on that. So from my point of view, the client interaction is actually very limited, which I mean, it obviously differs. Like if you're working on a sort of like a commingled funnel, you had hundreds of investors, I'm sure you're probably getting peppered. Well, because I know, because I'm on the other side of it, you're constantly asking investment managers questions, and it's probably far more interaction. But yeah, very little from where I sit anyway.
I think also a really good way of thinking about this is the amount of different types of client you can have. So if you're an analyst, you generally won't be client facing, but you could be working up to becoming an investment manager or something like that. And if you're then working with retail clients, you've got a lot more things to think about than if you're working for institutional clients. So the biggest thing is when you're starting out, you may not be qualified to give advice, and that means you have to be careful about what you say. But it doesn't mean say nothing, because you still want to build a relationship with those clients, but you don't want to say anything that could be given as advice, if that makes sense, but still try and build a relationship, even if that's like on a really personal basis. Sometimes good investment managers know their clients inside out, so that can be really useful, asking them what they're up to, how their day is, and things like that. Sometimes your client, you're not going to see the end client, but you might be interacting on behalf of a retail client with their IFA. With the IFA, you can be a little bit more technical with the way you explain things to them, but still I would do it on a similar kind of basis, because you want to make it easy for them to explain to their client. Even though an IFA has lots of technical knowledge, obviously they're much more easy to explain things to from your level to their level. They have a lot of other things to think about, like pension arrangements, inheritance tax, things that might not come up in your day-to-day role. So you're going to have more in-depth knowledge than them about what you're investing in for their clients. So the easier you can make it for them to explain to their clients what's going on, why the market's dipped, why that's affected their portfolio, what their risk level means for them, that's really going to make the IFA a bit more like gravitate towards you a bit more as an investment manager, because obviously the IFA, all they want to do is serve their clients. So if you help them to do that, you're in favor with them as your client. And the difference between pleasing an IFA and pleasing a retail client is when you're pleasing a retail client, you've got their money. When you please an IFA, you have access to lots more clients.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Knowing who you're talking to, knowing the intention behind the task is always helpful. And Monica, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I think the last thing I'd say is, as an investment analyst, as your first job, entry-level job into investments, the activities you have with clients, any type of client, you won't be on your own. You likely won't be directly in person or on Zoom with that client. You'll likely be preparing documents for somebody, or preparing a report or a presentation, or assisting somebody else in dealing with that client, I think, at this level. So those skills are communication and making their life easy, whether that is finding something for them quickly, preparing information. So just the pressure at this stage isn't on you to be in front of a client straight away, internally or externally.
Just one thing has sort of just occurred to me. So although we don't necessarily report to our client, we only report annually, there is an investment committee who effectively act in the interest of the client. So there'll be a board of sort of 3 or 4 people, and every time you make an investment, you've effectively got to get sign off from them. So although you might not be dealing directly, they sort of act on their behalf. So you're not completely left to your own devices, I guess. And yeah, I think I think I remember my first year, I didn't do any direct reporting to the client, whether that be presentations or anything. But I think also I work in a pretty small team. There's only 4 or 5 of us. So if you do want to sort of step up and start sort of chipping in a bit more with presentations, I think, your team normally be quite supportive of that. But yeah, like Monica says, like the majority will be assisting in putting these presentations and packs together.
Yeah, that's all very, very accurate. And I think if I can tie a little bit from my experience, always introducing yourself, you're on our call, who you are, what role you're doing is always really good. And I think, as what Monica and Jack said, preparation in advance is always very underrated. So make sure you do that. We have 2 recent questions, and they're both kind of in the same theme. So Zoe asks, I'm currently doing a master's in chemistry and she is unsure how to write a cover letter because she has no direct experience in the sector. And also, I think maybe this ties into the conversation we were having earlier. So when coming to the role without a financial background, how did you manage questions on perhaps company valuation modeling types of tasks, and how do you overcome those technical questions if you don't exactly have the direct experience in it?
And so I'm happy to start. I imagine Mia will probably have more to say for parts of this. So when it comes from doing a master's, the skills that you learn at master's level, in the same way that the skills you learn at a degree level, in some ways are universal. Like all science-based bachelors and all science-based masters will teach you certain types of skills. So research methods, right? Conducting experiments, looking at big data. The stock market is essentially just a lot of numbers that you have to interpret and understand and explain to a client, to anybody who wants to use that information as an analyst. And in a master's in chemistry, you are analysing data, usually chemical data, or depending on what type of chemistry you're doing. But so with some of our investment analysts where we work did physics, and I think one of them did a project using equations usually used to map stars to interpret trends in the stock market. So that's an example of a very, very relevant interview question, which, if you've done something like that, it's a great thing to talk about. But if you haven't, don't worry, because those skills are there. They are, a lot of analysts will typically come in with a lot of quantitative skills, and proving that you also have those soft skills to be able to talk to people is a big part of the job. I think we've probably covered quite well that at the end of the day, not a lot of our clients are experts in our area. That's why they've hired us to do a job for them. And being able to explain complicated or technical information simply and clearly is the skill, I think, at this level. And showing that you are self-motivated. Just talk about any time you've self-started, you've taught yourself something that you didn't need to know. Because if you're proving that you're going to go outside of your master's into a new career, that is the type of skills you want to try and get across.
Yeah, that's great. And I just wanted to tie into your response as well. So having a psychology degree, how did you formulate your cover letter when applying to jobs? How did you show that you're motivated and interested in investments as a career? Or how do you tie in unrelated backgrounds to a cover letter to make it stand out? I know that, for example, in my experience, either attending events like this or having to catch up with someone in the role already or in the company always makes it stand out. So did you find it something similar?
So I think I had a few points of relevant experience that I could draw on. So throughout my time at university, in my summers, I'd done administrative work in financial services industries. So even though the work I was doing was in admin or an internship project, those really helped me express that I have an interest in this sector. Then the psychology that I did projects that were tailored towards economic behavior, so behavioral finance, which was sort of an avenue in, where it felt like a step in between where I was and where the job I was going for was, like trying to create that bridge myself. Other things I did were join women in business societies at university and get to know people and talk to people. And when I find out that they're doing something in finance, ask them about what they do, where they work, you know, say, I'm interested, is there anything you could do? Could we have a chat about this at another time? And just putting myself across as someone who is interested and wants to learn about whatever it is that they're doing will help you, I think, in that process of saying, yes, this is what I'm doing right now, but I really genuinely am interested in getting to a job in finance, a job in this sector, whatever it is, if it's different to what you're doing now.
That sounds great. And Mia and Jack, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, definitely. So with regards to doing a master's in chemistry, I don't think that is in any way detrimental to a career in finance. From where I'm sat, we've got this huge trend in the markets for ESG, and it's not really going anywhere because we're trying to transition to renewable energy and things like that. And this is where you see a lot of funds that focus on things like that. I see so many analysts on these funds that have a background in energy, a background in chemistry. We've got someone in our team who's got a PhD. He used to be a chemist, and just understanding how all these things interact in a way that we don't is really beneficial to the team, and it would be beneficial to things like an ESG fund maybe. Obviously it entirely depends on what in finance you want to do, but there is a real opening for people with any kind of STEM experience and chemistry knowledge for so many different reasons, because we're investing in things like infrastructure and renewable energy and things like that. It's absolutely not a useless point. What I would also say is that even without paying hundreds for exams before you get a job, there's so many resources where you can learn other skills. So there's free investment course things on OpenLearn, the Open University website. Brushing up your Excel is never ever going to hurt you, I promise. That will never be a waste of time. All sorts of things like that. You can even just Google things, just find anything that's free and it's probably still useful. So those are ways that you can put little direct things on your CV. It's just something, and it also demonstrates how much of your free time you're dedicating to pursuing this, which it also says a lot.
Yeah, I guess
Investopedia is a resource I'd recommend people look at if you're getting asked terms in interviews you don't understand.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I could add is, yeah, so I mean, one of your greatest resources will be sort of if you're joining an investment society, which a lot of people do at uni who are interested in the sector. If you're a first year going in and there's people who are in their third and fourth year who have generally done an internship, maybe 2 internships, they're a great resource for you. Also, just reaching out to alumni, or going to various talks, etc. But in terms of sort of cover letters and CVs, there's plenty of sort of templates out there if you're worried about how to actually structure the cover letter. I remember probably Investopedia as well, but like Wall Street, Oasis and companies like that produce cover letter formats. And also, just, it sounds ridiculous, but like make sure you haven't got any grammatical errors in your CV or cover letter, because that looks really, really poor. Be concise. I mean, I was always told CV should never be longer than a page, especially at sort of entry level where you probably don't have pages and pages of experience. And also, when you're sort of giving examples of things you've done, don't just say I was part of team X and we delivered Y. You should be like, how did you actually contribute? Not how did sort of the team contribute, but what sort of individual impact did you have? I think it's just a bit more sort of giving sort of real examples really of how you impacted things.
I have a little bit to add to that as well. I can just see the question. It says, did the interviewers ask any financial knowledge during your job interviews? This one is something that is really, really scary when you're going for those interviews, because you think, if they ask me anything technical, I don't know what I'm going to say. And I still get that now. And the main thing is to just take a step back and realize the market's huge. There is no one that knows everything about it. Different job roles, different levels of seniority, different specialisms. There's not going to be a point where you know everything and then you're going to teach someone else everything. You're going to know what you know, you're going to retain what you use. When you do your exams, you'll get a blanket knowledge at that level. Some of it you'll never look at again, some of it you will. When I went from admin to investment analyst, I wasn't asked a single technical question. I think at that level, they are very reasonable in what they expect from you in your interview, and they know that you're in a learning position. When I was interviewing to go from analyst to analyst, I did get some technical questions. Not in every interview I've had have I had technical questions. Sometimes they do it and it feels like a test. And that is more nerve-wracking than when they do it and it seems like they're just trying to gauge where you're at. So in my last interview, I was asked questions around volatility. I was asked questions around assessing 2 direct equity stocks in comparison, and I got the volatility question wrong. I wouldn't have known I got it wrong until I asked him, did I get that wrong? And then when he said, yes, I said, can you show me how to get it right? And I got my calculator out in a job interview and we went through it until I understood it. And then I said, did anyone else you've interviewed get that question right? And he said, no. So it's not about testing to see if you're good enough. It's about seeing where you're at, seeing how you respond to not knowing things, and seeing how you overcome that. And I was offered that job, so.
Yeah, just a minor thing to add onto that. I was probably maybe a bit silly in my interviews. So don't sort of make out you know more than you don't, because I've been caught out. You think you learn once, but like I've been caught out like a couple of times in interviews by sort of over-egging my knowledge. And then obviously you've got a specialist sat in front of you who knows obviously a million times more about that sector than you do. So yeah, just be honest and don't try and sort of claim to be an expert in sort of a field you're not.
That's all really good advice on opposite sides of the spectrum as well. I think communication is definitely a big aspect. You want to know how you work out a problem. Just don't pause and not say anything. I think that's the biggest issue some people face, and I can relate to that as well. So yeah, and as well as Jack, as your point, being humble in what you don't know as well and not overshooting your shot is definitely good advice. I'm conscious we are 2 minutes away from our time, but we have one last question. Zoe asks, I have a place on investment analyst internship this summer, but in my degree, she has not done any statistical modules. Have you found any useful websites or courses you could suggest to go to help prepare her for an analysis side before, so she can gain some necessary financial knowledge?
I do. I didn't find this until after I was qualified, but I did it anyway. But the CFA, who do the Chartered Financial Analyst program, do something called the Investment Foundations program, which is entirely free, and you have all the resource and you have all the time in the world to do it. You do 2 mock exams, I think, and then an actual exam, but it's all at your own leisure. You can pick and choose what you look at. And I found that in comparison to the CISI's level 3, it covered some different things. So even if you've done one, the other one will still help you. If you've not done anything, that is a really good blanket kind of things you need to know. And it is around a level 3, I would say, and you can do it at your own leisure, and you can pick through it and pick out what bits you might really need to know. Also, the Open University does things like asset allocation and risk and things like that, which are really useful. Understanding risk is going to be huge for you.
If you don't even know what you don't know, one thing you could do is pick a stock or a fund or something, look at a fact sheet and like highlight all the things that you don't understand on there, and then Google them one at a time. You know, if you don't know when they're talking about the volatility of what's gone on, Google it, look it up and work it out. Maybe have an annotated example fact sheet for if you're in equities or funds, just to build that up yourself. And even if you don't know, and you turn up and they ask you a question you have no idea about, say you don't know and work it out with them. I think Mia's example was excellent of how to tackle those types of questions.
Okay, well, that's great. Thank you so much, Mia, Monica, and Jack. Like, you have highlighted some really good areas, and I hope everyone found it useful. I'm conscious it's 7 p.m., so that's a wrap for our event. But again, thank you, and I hope everyone has found it useful. We have a really wide range of experiences, so thank you again for all your advice. And yeah, I think I'll call it in. Thank you again to all our panelists.